Good morning. Welcome to our church.
Hello, Pastor. What's your position on women in ministry?
Your name is?
You know, the Bible speaks against homosexuality and women in ministry, don't you think?
This is probably not the best time to discuss this. And what was your name? Get me out of here.
Groups provide the means to achieve humanity's most lofty goals. But when groups oppose each other, they are sources of hostility, abuse, and aggression. In the above cartoon, it may appear that the group being attacked or sided against is women, or perhaps homosexuals. If that were the case, this would be an example of intergroup conflict. While the visitor is asking a question to find where the pastor's allegiances lie, he's creating an us-against-them dynamic. But what he is actually doing is even more insidious, however. He is setting the stage for an intra-group conflict. It is unfortunate, but no surprise, that within the church structure there are a wide variety of groups representing different perspectives and agendas. Sometimes these agendas take the center stage and become divisive and damaging, not only to individuals, but to the organization, needlessly pitting one group against another. The above comic illustrates how different groups within the church form based on issues or ideas that shape or mark one particular church group against another. Where the common binding element within the Christian church should center around the redemption in Christ, and consequently sharing that message with a lost world, issues such as women in ministry or homosexuality can tend to polarize people into groups that in turn members of the same body against each other. Is it really the issue that people care about, or is it something else that drives this inner hostility that emerges towards others? In Forsyth's chapters on both intragroup and intergroup conflicts, he comments on how much of the conflict that occurs between groups rises out of the competition for scarce resources. He states, as groups try to dominate the resources, they seek to gain control over the other group's resources, people, and identity. Proponents of the social dominance theory pose that conflict-laden relationships among social groups result from the natural tendency for people to form subgroups within the larger society, and then for these groups to vie with one another for power. If this is in fact the case, the obvious question is, what possible resources could the church be fighting over? Is it people? A high moral ground? An influencing voice? Whatever the resource is, the outcome has turned from an other-oriented position that represents Christ to a me-centric gospel centered on every other agenda except the true message of salvation. An obvious illustration of the division between churches as a result of intragroup division can be seen on just about every main street city in the United States. On one corner, you'll find the Baptist church, across the street, a Methodist church, and right next door, another brand of Baptist church. How did this happen? According to Forsyth, conflict occurs when there is a difference of opinions. As disunity grows, persuasion occurs as individuals attempt to gain support. This gives way to arguing and emotions, which can quickly replace logic. The result is what was once a unified group has now become a group split into factions and coalitions. These factions form into new groups as people take sides, develop inclusion-exclusion parameters, experience cohesion, select leaders, and ultimately form new groups. In most instances, there's not an outright deliberate attempt between churches or individuals to bring division, yet somehow this is often the outcome. As is illustrated in the comic, many individuals will, if given a choice, avoid situations that are rife with conflict. Yet conflict seems to be an unavoidable consequence of life in groups. The result, Forsyth continues, is, instead of working together, they compete against one another. Instead of accepting each other, for who they are, members treat those they like better than those they dislike. In this sense, unfortunately, the Christian church as a whole has not modeled an accepting, tolerant community that embraces diversity, either toward members outside the group or for those on the inside. Intergroup emotions, such as contempt, often lead to extreme levels of group hate. The result is we spend more of our efforts tearing each other down rather than focusing on what we do share and celebrate together. Managing conflict is not an easy task, but it is certainly possible. Forsyth stresses the importance of cooperation that is best fostered through decategorization or personalization. This idea reinforces the concept that members are more than simple entities. They are individuals. The emphasis is on getting to know one another, which is often best achieved by focusing on a common task. And what better common task do believers have than the cause of Christ? If we as believers have any hope of reaching the lost for Christ, we would be well advised to start within our own camp before attempting to address those outside the camp. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the church of Ephesus, reminds us and them in how to live a life of love, as he exhorts, "Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Ephesians 6:12.